Throughout the life cycle phases of a system, a number of concepts are developed to assist in the planning and management of the various aspects of the life cycle. One of the concepts developed through the very early technical processes is the retirement concept. This presentation identifies the major steps that can support the development of a retirement concept for a system, and a simple example is offered by way of illustration. There are four broad life cycle phases for a system. In the first, the pre-acquisition phase, an idea of a system is generated as a result of business planning. Consideration of the possible options results in the confirmation of early business needs for the system, which are then elaborated by a business case, which justifies expenditure of organisational resources on the acquisition of the system. The second phase, the acquisition phase, is focused on bringing the system into being and then into service in the organisation. This would normally involve defining the system in terms of business needs and requirements, stakeholder needs and requirements, and then system requirements. And then engaging a contractor to develop or to deliver the system. During the utilisation phase, the system is operated and supported until the business has no further need for the system. Or it can no longer meet the functions required of it by the organisation, or it's no longer cost effective to keep it in service. During utilisation, the system may undergo a number of modifications and upgrades to rectify performance shortfalls, to meet changing operational requirements, or to meet changes in external environments. And the reason for the modifications is to enable ongoing support for the system to make sure that it can be maintained, or to enhance current performance or reliability. The final phase is the retirement phase. So following operational use and system support, the system is phased out and retired from service. So the system lifecycle concludes with the retirement phase. If the business need for the capability still exists in the organisation, the conclusion of one system lifecycle marks the start of another, and the process begins again. Now, as we noted at the start of the presentation, during the pre-acquisition phase, a number of lifecycle concepts are delivered as part of the definition of a system. There are 5 principal lifecycle concepts developed to describe the system as it moves through the life cycle. The first is the operational concept, the ops con. A system ops con describes what the system will do, not how it will do it, and why, the rationale. An ops con is a user-oriented document that describes system characteristics of the to-be-delivered system from the user's perspective. The ops con is used to communicate overall quantitative and qualitative system characteristics to the acquirer, the supplier, the users, and other organisational elements. The acquisition concept describes the way the system will be acquired, including aspects such as stakeholder engagement, requirements definition, solicitation and contracting issues, design, production, and verification. The deployment concept describes the way the system will be validated, delivered, and introduced into operations, and of course any pre-existing system taken out of service. The support system describes the desired support infrastructure and the manpower considerations for supporting the system after it's deployed. A support concept addresses operating support, engineering support, maintenance support, supply support, and training support. Then, last but not least, the retirement concept describes the way the system will be removed from operation and retired. It's the retirement concept that's of main interest to us here. Now, traditionally, we've referred to the actions at the end of the life cycle as disposal. In fact, the current standards don't refer to retirement, but still refer to disposal. For example, ISO IEC IEEE 15288 refers to the disposal phase, which comprises the following activities: plan disposal, perform disposal, and finalise disposal. The NCOSE System Engineering Handbook states, the purpose of the disposal process is to remove a system element from the operation environment with the intent of permanently terminating its use. Now, this is obviously disposal rather than retirement. It implies that at the end of its life cycle, the system will be permanently terminated. Now, the language used in these definitions is focused on disposal, which coincides with the end of life, which coincides with the end of the life cycle. While the system will of course eventually require disposal, It's important to recognise that a system may exist in more than one life cycle, and therefore a system at the end of its current life cycle doesn't necessarily have to be at the end of its current life, and therefore be disposed. In fact, to approach the ultimate goal in zero waste, a system is desirably going to exist for as long as possible, in as many life cycles as possible, before it is ultimately terminated. The retirement concept should therefore address more than just the disposal of a system at the end of its life, and must recognise that the system may well, and ideally should, exist in a number of life cycles, from each of which it is retired, before reaching its end of life and ultimately disposed. So it's important that we make the distinction then between retirement and disposal. Let's look at a simple example to illustrate. In the first life cycle, the system may be retired because the business that owns the system changes focus and moves away from the business area for which the system was acquired. So the initial owners may sell the system to a second organisation, which, having completed conceptual design and preliminary design in that life cycle, has decided to meet business requirements with a commercial off-the-shelf solution, or albeit a second-hand one. So the system now enters a second life cycle. Perhaps a number of its elements, the operating personnel for example, would be replaced and some of its elements upgraded, but the system is in the second life cycle. When the second organisation wishes to replace the system, perhaps it's become costly to maintain, the system may be sold to a third organisation which wishes to meet its design requirements with a modified COTS solution based on a refurbished second-hand system. Again, a number of system elements may be added or removed, but the system is still in another life cycle. So then that third organisation, which acquires the system, refurbishment and fields it, may then just finally find that the system is uneconomical to repair and it is ultimately disposed of as scrap. So you can see in this diagram why we need to make the distinction between retirement and disposal. The system is retired at the end of its current life cycle, in this case at the end of 2 previous life cycles, but it's not disposed of until the end of its life, in this example at the end of the 3rd life cycle. In striving for zero waste, we'd like to design the system so that it can retire between many life cycles and have as long a life as possible before it is ultimately disposed of. Now, when considering the retirement aspects of the system during its design, in the retirement concept, it's useful to undertake 3 broad tasks. First, we need to identify the reasons why a system may well be retired. And then, for each of those potential reasons, we need to identify what potential retirement methods there are, which then allows designers to identify the design issues, which may arise from consideration of each of the retirement methods. For convenience, the following focuses on the major system, but a similar analysis would be required for each of the elements of the capability, so for the operators of the capability, for the support staff and so on. So let's look at the first step, identifying the reasons for retirement. Now, of course, there may be any number of reasons why a system may be retired. First, and probably the first that comes to mind, is that the system may no longer be usable and or supportable. Or most of the system may be usable, but because more than one of its critical elements may be unusable, the system itself may not be operational. Or the system or one of its significant elements may have been damaged beyond economic repair, either by natural causes or fire, or perhaps in the case of a military system, by some battlefield damage. Of course, the system may still be perfectly usable, but there may no longer be a use for it. There may no longer be any reason for maintaining it inside the organisation. So first, the business may have to sell the system, even though it's usable, because perhaps an operating licence was revoked, or spectrum is unavailable, or public perception means that the organisation is more comfortable with not owning the system anymore. Or the business need for the system, or a business owner, may not be able to afford it as a result of a downturn in the market. Or perhaps the business owner is downsizing or retiring, or just simply has no need for the system anymore. So we can see here why we need to make the distinction then between retirement and disposal. In the first of these reasons, the system is unusable and is being disposed of. In the other reasons, the system is perfectly usable in one or more ways, but it must be retired from this life cycle. So, again, we retire a system at the end of its current life cycle, we dispose at the end of its life. In any case, the system must be retired. So, how might that occur? Well, there are three broad ways in which a system might be retired. The first we will call recovery. In that case, the system or its elements may be able to be reused, put to another purpose. It could be refurbished, that is perhaps serviced or painted and then put to another purpose, or remanufactured, which is similar to refurbishment, but in remanufacturing the system would be completely disassembled, any worn parts replaced with new parts, and then reassembled. And then there's recycling. In recycling, raw materials are extracted from the system and then recycled into a different form or sold as scrap. And then ultimately in disposal, the system is simply destroyed and disposed of as waste, or perhaps in the case of an expensive asset such as a major aircraft, are placed in storage. As a means of illustrating the use of the methodology, let's look at a simple example of a retirement concept for something straightforward like a family home. So remember the first step, reasons for retirement. Well, during early design, the homeowners may consider the following possibilities for retiring the house. In the first case, the house has served the family well, but there is some unexpected change in the family composition, which means that a larger or perhaps even a smaller house is required. Perhaps the unexpected arrival of triplets requires at least another bedroom, or sometime later, as children leave home, the parents may decide to downsize. In the second case, the house is still very useful, but the owners perhaps are leaving the workplace and they're liquidating their assets in preparation for retirement. In the third case, the house is still suitable, but an opportunity has arisen to move into a more suitable house, leaving this one surplus to requirements. In the fourth case, the house is still suitable, but the family's financial circumstances may have worsened and the mortgage might no longer be affordable. In the fifth case, the house is still suitable, but the family's financial circumstances mean that they desire to take up some sort of financial advantage, perhaps from freeing up one or more of the rooms, perhaps leasing one of the rooms to a tenant or a boarder. In case 6, the house is no longer suitable. It's been destroyed or it's uninhabitable, perhaps due to some catastrophic event such as a fire, an earthquake, a storm, a flood, or even perhaps willful destruction. And so the building needs to be replaced. In the final case, the building has reached the end of its life and it's no longer inhabitable. That is, it's not safe, or it doesn't meet the building codes, or for whatever reason, their family is no longer able to live in the house and it needs to be disposed of. So, having looked at the reasons for retirement, let's look at the possible retirement methods. Well, in the first case, if the house is uncomfortable because it's either too large or too small, there are two options for retirement. Where the house could be put up for sale, or it could be used as an investment property and leased to tenants. In cases 2, 3 and 4, remember the house is still useful, but the owners are liquidating their assets, and so the preferred method of retirement is sale. Noticing that in case 4, when the family is under a bit of pressure, there may be a little bit more urgency associated if the family is struggling to pay the mortgage. In case 5, the family is struggling a little financially, and so part of the house could be reused as leased accommodation. In cases 6 and 7, the building is no longer useful. It's been destroyed or reached the end of its life, and the family has 3 broad options. Either to clear the current site and rebuild, to rebuild and then sell or lease the building, moving to another location, or to sell the current site as an empty lot and move to the new location. So we've examined the ways in which the system may be retired. What are the resulting design issues such that the system will be prepared for retirement? In other words, during conceptual design, the house doesn't exist yet. We're thinking about what should the house look like, or what should we do in design to prepare the house for its ultimate retirement. And so one of the first means of retirement was sale. Under cases 1, 2, 3 and 4, the house was to be sold. Now, to ensure that the best price is obtained as quickly as possible, especially in a forced sale in case 4, the house should be as desirable as possible to as wide a possible range of prospective buyers. Now that means that the family will need to consider the needs of other home buyers when designing the home. Or in other words, they might wish to avoid designing the home to be ideally suited to their circumstances because they may prefer to have it a more normal house, more desired by a normal family and therefore increase the number of people who would be attracted to the house when it was available for sale. Additionally, any refurbishment required to prepare the house for sale has to be accomplished as quickly as possible, particularly if large pieces of fixed equipment or built-in furniture will move with the family. The second means is lease. Under Case 1, the family might retain the house and rent it out. As with the sale, the house has to be designed so it is as desirable as possible to as many prospective tenants as possible. Additionally now, there are other system elements such as a swimming pool or a very intricate manicured garden, which is going to cause problems if the tenant doesn't look after the house in the same way that the homeowner did. And so we need to be careful to design a house that is going to be looked after when it's owner occupied, but could become difficult to maintain when the house is rented out. Or, instead of renting the entire house out, some portion of the house could be rented. So if the family leases out one or more of the rooms, consideration again has to be given to the way in which that might happen as the house is being designed. So for example, how desirable are access to shared facilities, both from the owner and the tenant's perspective? In some cases, the design may need to consider such simple things as providing the facility for privacy of use of shared bathrooms, or perhaps a separate entrance might also be useful. Perhaps even the ability to account separately, that is to meter, water, electricity and gas might be useful. The nature of the potential lessees must also be considered. Families will place different constraints than individuals on the nature of the lease. So if we're interested in the potential to lease the room out, the building could be designed to accommodate these aspects, or at least be able to add them on quickly and cheaply when required. Now, in the catastrophic cases, when the house is no longer inhabitable and we are now thinking of disposing of the house, to accommodate cases 6 and 7, we'd have to clear the site prior to either rebuilding or sale of the empty lot. In that case, then, designers have to take into account any opportunity to recover materials as safely as possible, to not use hazardous materials to enable the destruction to be safe, and perhaps to use materials where the cost of destruction is lower. So even from this simple example, we can see that a retirement concept must consider many more things than the ultimate disposal of the system. Although system designers must be cognizant of disposal issues, they must also accommodate the fact that the system will invariably exist in and be retired from a number of life cycles before it reaches that end of life. If we just simply focus on disposal, then we're not really doing a good design to allow the system to move between life cycles and therefore have a long life. So, ultimately then, in conclusion, we could say that the system retirement concept should focus on the entire life of the system, which will include the requirements to transition between life cycles as often as possible before the system is finally disposed of as it reaches its end of life. Now, this has been a very brief introduction with a very simple example. If you're interested in more detail, you may wish to read this paper. It's called Design for System Retirement, and it's published in the Journal of Cleaner Production. Well, if you're interested in this and similar topics, you may also be interested in the Capability Systems Centre at UNSW Canberra. The centre is an independent think tank that offers cutting-edge research and analysis to government, defence and to industry. If you are after more information, please visit our website. You may also be interested in these two texts, System Engineering Practice and Requirements Practice. Both are available in paperback form from the Amazon websites or the publisher Argos Press websites.